Yes.
Oh, that's what, yeah.
So there's this one, and is it this one?
No, that's
That one. That one's mine.
Okay, so it's just right here if you're
Yeah.
looking for it, and you share screen on the Zoom, so my classmate can see it.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, that's what usually.
all right. I'm gonna start. Should I start with this mic? Okay. I just want to. Oh, it has to be on, huh? Amazing. All right. We're just going to start, guys. It's a little bit after 11. We have one of our students is in Taiwan, and it's after 11 p.m. there. I want to introduce myself and say welcome. My name is Natalie. I'm the Dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences. This is the second day of our HSS EXPO, which is part of EXPO Week, which highlights and features student work across the School of Humanities and Social Sciences. We do all kinds of interesting stuff here, including the things that Professor Mancia showed us yesterday in the BC Archive. There will be a performance out there by the Lily Pond. We will do walking tours. There's much more to come in this HSS week. This morning, I am delighted to introduce Professor Casey Johnson and the students for the Senior Thesis Research Project from the Scholars Program. So, Professor Johnson.
For you, thanks all for coming. This is, I think, the third year that we've done this thesis class, students from humanities and social sciences. Presenting the expo, it's a lot of fun. We have a little twist to start out with. Professor Lee's student Kobe is studying abroad in Taiwan, so he was very kind to stay up and present for us. So he's going to kick off. Then Julia, Joseph, Sabrina, and Alyssa. So Kobe, the floor is yours. You can share your screen.
Okay. Can you see my screen? Yes?
Yes, yes.
Here's something, yes. Hello?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Hello. So, yes, my name is Kobe Liu. My advisor is Professor Bui. And my thesis, the title of my thesis is Into the Gray. And I'm focusing on gray zone tactics and gray zone coercion by China when it comes to Taiwan and how to best combat that. And to introduce this, I thought I would show this poster. This is a poster released this year by the Chinese Coast Guard. And it shows in the middle right here, this is Taiwan, and a sort of a different ships and helicopters are surrounding Taiwan, and the characters in the middle basically translate to throat choking. So I thought that is a good sort of introduction to this topic. So my research question is, how can Taiwan develop a resilient all-of-society digital coordination infrastructure to effectively counter the structural asymmetries of China's institutionalized para-war doctrine and gray zone coercion? So that's a mouthful, but I will get through it and start to explain things, and things will become clear as I go. So my argument is that China is ramping up its military capability to prepare for and intimidate Taiwan by many means, and Taiwan faces acute political and structural challenges in their response. And then finally, Ukraine provides a method and a good example for how to use asymmetric capabilities and specifically digital infrastructure to combat in these sort of gray zones. So, for those of you who don't know, this is a map of China and the surrounding East Asia region, and Taiwan is over here. And for those of you who don't know, in the late 1940s, the Civil War in China ended, and the nationalists retreated to Taiwan, where the communists maintained control of the mainland. And since then, there have always been tensions, but in the last 20 years under Xi Jinping, or last 15 years under Xi Jinping, basically those tensions have risen. And now we'll get on to the man himself, Xi Jinping. So if you think about the Chinese communist regime, this man is at the center of it, and he has dictated basically this recent policy going forward. I thought this picture is a good example of this, and he has really intertwined Taiwan to his legacy. And as he's getting older, there is more and more thought that he might want to increase aggression or maybe try and complete the goal of reunification before his death. And another reason why Xi Jinping's personal personality and he himself is so important is because if you haven't heard, there have been many military purges of the Chinese military leadership, and this is a picture of Zhang Youxia, who's a top military general, basically number 2 under Xi Jinping. So in the Central Military Commission, which is the top of the Chinese military, the People's Liberation Army, Zhang Youxia was basically the vice chairman. He was number 2, and he's currently being investigated. And typically, so since the beginning of this, of the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, there's a Central Military Commission has had 7 people on it. And as of right now, literally all but 2 have been expelled or investigated. Those 2 people are Xi Jinping and Jiang Zemin. And Jiang Zemin is basically the corruption investigation officer. And the scale purge extends beyond this top leadership to the generals and lieutenant generals, defense industrial officials, 3-star generals promoted by Xi himself have also been investigated, and 80% of the CMC officials, the people I mentioned on the last slide, held key operational roles. And in addition to this, so basically there's a big churn in the military, and it's all basically Xi is personalizing his command and basically saying if you're not loyal to what he's going for, you're being investigated or you're out. And a big component of everyone who's getting promoted to these roles, the textbook that they're reading is what's called the Science of Military Strategy within the PLA. And a big part of what the Science of Military Strategy talks about is the concept of para-war. And it's basically war doctrine applied to peacetime. And the idea is that war is fought by many means, not just by explicitly by guns and boats and things like this. So a big part of this para-war is what's called military-civil fusion. And in the Science of Military Strategy, they talk about this, and it's basically the deep connection between what is commercial and what is military, what is civilian and what is military. And a great example of this is oil rig infrastructure. So oil is not only a important national resource for military campaigns and such, but it is also, an oil rig is literally a floating naval base where operations can be held out of. And a great example of this is this oil rig was moved into Taiwanese waters back in July, and this is not something that they're legally allowed to do, but it's sort of an intimidation tactic. And in addition to being a naval base, it also gives them eyes over the waters, getting the Taiwanese people accustomed to just these small incursions. And obviously, these incursions go much beyond this. They extend into cyberspace. So in the hacking domains, there's constant hacking on the side of China attempts to hack Taiwan and other countries as well. They have a web surveillance regime, which you may have heard of. They call it the Great Firewall, or it's been coined the Great Firewall. And in addition to this, they're exporting this capability. So basically, China has, within China, the internet is very much restricted, and they're exporting this technology to other countries as well, such as Pakistan and Myanmar. And basically what this allows them to do is basically control narrative, not only in their country, but also influence over it in other countries. So even though this is, a thing that they're selling to the other governments, it has an important national security purpose for them as well. In addition to this, Chinese ships have been suspected of cutting undersea cables. So these are the fiber optic cables which provide internet to Taiwan. And, in many ways, this is basically an act of war. You're basically cutting off infrastructure. But again, they're acting in this gray zone, in this liminal space where they're not necessarily crossing the threshold of escalating a total war. They're pushing the boundary constantly. In addition to this, they have many larger scale exercises. Basically, these are they basically are doing training exercises of a blockade or an amphibious invasion of Taiwan, but not actually going through with it. And they're always basically making incursions into Taiwanese airspace or waters, whether it's thousands of incursions, hundreds every month, hundreds of flights every month over into Taiwanese airspace, Navy vessels, and also and it's increasing in the past like 5 years. There's been, in post May 2024, it's been 209 months. As a visualization of these exercises, this is a visualization of the exercise formations. This is Taiwan in the middle. And as you can see, there's really not that much difference between these exercise formations and an actual blockade. It's just the fact that they don't pull the trigger. They're really just on the nice edge between what is an actual conflict and what is an exercise. And these serve the purpose of training their military, obviously, but also for just psychologically saying and demonstrating we have this capability both to Taiwan and to the international community. This is another, also a animation that they released in 2024 along with one of their exercises, and it's basically them showing dropping missiles on Taiwan's critical infrastructure. And on the other side of this is Taiwan. So Taiwan is a democratic country, and this is their current president, Lai Ching-te. But their politics is, the democratic process is very alive and well, and that means that there's also a lot of political opposition. So this is the 2024 election, and the DPP, while President Lai won the election, it was very close and split between two other parties, and the two other parties are not, there's a complicated history where the KMT is, even they're the historic Chinese Nationalist Party, but they're much more focused, they're much less antagonistic to China. And where the DPP thinks about independence, the KMT thinks more about appeasement of China and not increasing the military budget. So problems for Taiwan are increased aggression from the PLA, increased technical sophistication from the PLA, not enough firepower, Taiwan's infrastructure vulnerability, like I mentioned with those fiber optic cables, and also they're highly dependent on imported energy, and they also have internal division and not necessarily a unified front in terms of leadership. Their advantages are the silicon shield. Basically, they're the main producer of high of advanced semiconductor technology, both to China and the West. So this makes them like a large-scale war would disrupt all these supply chains. So many people sort of are against that. So for that reason, their geography is suitable, and that an amphibious invasion is notoriously hard to go through with. There's PLA division, like I mentioned with the purges, and as well they have allied support such as from the United States and potentially from Japan. And another thing that could be working in their favor is lessons from Ukraine. So Ukraine has adapted, like they are also a smaller country, and in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, they have been able to defend against the Russian aggression with much less, and they have done this a lot with digital infrastructure like this app. They have an Army app, Army Plus app, and that's basically just for handling all of the orchestration for the soldiers. In addition to this, they have marketplaces like this that basically are connecting the manufacturers directly with the forces fighting on the very front lines. They have multi-domain integration in their command and control software. The command and control software is the software from which military decisions are made, and multi-domain means they're connecting the naval, airspace, and land decisions all in one software. It makes it very easy to coordinate complicated missions. They're using all types of different data sources. They're using mission synchronization software, basically coordinating all their missions in this united command and control software. And they are using AI-enabled targeting and information gathering, as well as using crowdsourced civilian intelligence as a Telegram bot that civilians can send information to, that's integrated into that system I was talking about before. Using that civilian information, they can also project missile trajectories that are spotted by civilians, and they have resilient connectivity provided by satellite communication like Starlink. So what are the lessons from this? Number one, China is not engaging in typical peacetime doctrine as we might like to think of it. They're engaged in para-war, and that means you cannot apply peacetime doctrine to it. Doesn't necessarily mean you apply wartime either, but you have to be thoughtful about it. And the best way, in my opinion, to combat this, given the constraints on the Taiwanese budget due to political tension, and also and also just like the size difference between China and Taiwan, they need to think about using this digital advantage. And the last thing I want to leave you with is that rules-based orders have never been immortal. The idea that international politics has ever been a game that hasn't always been in flux is a myth. These things are always changing, and it's just now that the best way to work within this new world and adapt in it is digital infrastructure, because it's so much more. It moves so much quicker, and it allows a country to be more thing. And now I would like to open up to questions.
Question for Kobe.
Hi, Kobe. Thank you. That was very informative. I'm Steve Rennie. I'm the chair of the history department. I would imagine that the Chinese military is paying very close attention to what's happening on the Strait of Hormuz. So I wonder how that conflict and that particular part of it, to your knowledge, is playing into Chinese military planning. To the extent that's something that you or any other researcher outside the intelligence community might deal with.
Like, yeah, just sorry, because I can't quite hear. The question is about whether China is also paying attention to the conflict in Ukraine and how they might be taking lessons from
No, not Ukraine. Iran, the Strait of Hormuz. And I'm thinking in particular of the importance of the Strait of Taiwan to global shipping, and the extent to which, of course, the Chinese military is paying attention to the Strait, what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz. So I'm just wondering how you reflected on that on conflict in Ukraine. So now that we have this war, what might you be able to tell us about how the Chinese might be taking that the Strait of Hormuz into consideration when they're thinking about the Strait of Taiwan?
Yeah, definitely. I think a big. I mean, there's so many things, but one thing that makes me think of is, supply chains have been like weaponized more than ever. We've seen this in the past, 2 years or so. But the idea that, I think a big lesson from that is that because Iran has just control over this small thing, they're able to then leverage it because the supply chain for oil in particular is just so vulnerable, and oil is just such a supply-driven resource. But so in the same way that gray zone tactics apply to everything I talked about, they definitely apply to supply chain. I would say that's like the biggest thing that I didn't include in this presentation. And and obviously with the tariff negotiations, all these things, you have to, warfare is not defined only to this domain of firing ammunition. It's also in these other realms. Same thing with, in some ways it also shows that maybe Taiwan's control over advanced manufacturing semiconductors, that is a big leverage in the same way that Iran has control of the Hormuz Strait. It's definitely, there are many lessons, I guess is my takeaway.
Thanks, Kobe. It was really, really informative. So I don't know how long you've been living in Taiwan on your study abroad. Say how long it's been. I have a question. Wait, I mean, did you move there a week ago, or you've been there a semester?
Yeah, I've been here I got here in late February, and then
Okay.
so.
Yeah, so just from conversations with people on the street, and also your sense of how active the people are in elections. Like, for example, in our country, very few people participate in elections. So you presented the opposing parties and the shifts there, but just from people on the street and how often people actually vote, do you get a sense this is top of mind for people in Taiwan, or people are sort of setting it aside and not thinking about it?
sometimes it reminds me of the U.S. in many ways because politics is, I mean, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but it is like, it's a sensitive subject. I mean, maybe this is everywhere, I guess, but like, I've met people with different sort of opinions, and it's not necessarily the first thing to talk about. And I'm always sort of touchy about it, but I can tell that it's sensitive. And one thing I think about when it comes to digital, like orchestration, I'm not necessarily saying one side is the correct one and that this is for either side. My point is more, I guess, if you want to have coordination, if you want to have a place at the bargaining table where you get what you want, or you have the opposition, the potential to be able to fight for what you want, or bargain, or concede, you know, the ability to be able to, the capability to be able to organize and fight in some way, or, you know, do something is important, even if you don't have to use it. But yes, no, it's definitely back to the core of the question. It's touchy, and it's definitely varied.
Thank you.
All right, Kobe, thank you. We'll move on. Kobe, thanks a lot. Thank you very much for staying up with us, and now we'll move on.
Thank you.
Do I exit out of this?
Yeah.
Exit out, just so I can.
Oh, this one.
And then just present right there.
Do you wanna? Oh, you want?
And then. Perfect. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. Is that good? Okay. Okay. Hi everyone. I'm Julia Chistowicz. Today I'm going to be presenting my undergraduate thesis. I'm a Spanish translation major. Oh, is this necessary? Yeah.
Yes.
Sure. And so my undergraduate thesis is Playing with Mystery, Understanding Catalan Identity Through Medieval Performance. So the question at hand is, what was the significance of the surgical drama Catalan? The surgical drama kind of refers to any sort of dramatization of religious text, whether it's during Mass, or feast day, a celebration. It could be choir singing, it could be just reading biblical text out loud, it could be acting in certain plays. And what did that play, what role did that play in fostering a sense of community? And how does that remain with us today? So of course the methodology of this thesis kind of was inspired by, the project in general was inspired by a medieval performance class I took with Professor Lauren Mancia. And she's right here today and with all of my classmates as well. And basically at the end of this, we discovered with the research scholarship that Lauren Mancia has done on performance that through embodying and actually being in specific space and doing what medieval people would have done, you discover much more than what you discover in the archive. And so here's an example of what we did at the end of our class, and we went to Toronto to perform a cyclic mystery play cycle. So back to my project here, just to get a little bit of an understanding of the political scope of Catalonia at this time. Catalonia actually, as it is today, is just a province of Spain, but back then, in 1137, it formed part of the Crown of Aragon, and is actually really big. And it expanded all the way to Athens, Naples, Sardinia, so it had a lot of territorial expansion in the Mediterranean, which meant a lot of resources were flowing into bigger cities like Barcelona, making them much more wealthier, forming a bourgeoisie class, and the formation of guilds. Guilds being people that would specialize in specific things like iron making, wool making, silver making, and so forth. So, at the same time, though, in 1264, we also have the creation of Corpus Christi. It sucks you can't see the titles, but Corpus Christi is a celebration basically dedicated to the celebration of the body of Christ, the blood of Christ. And it was done, It was done because there was a bunch of supposed miracles that would happen, and Pope Urban IV decided we have to celebrate this. This is a sign from the heavens that we have to celebrate this, and so 60 days after the resurrection of Christ, it is celebrated all around Europe because of the Mass, procession, And then what's interesting is that every region sort of takes it their own way and does something different. And so in the case of,
Oh, okay. Or can I, perfect, okay. In the case of Catalonia.
Kind of quicker now?
Yes, perfect, thank you so much. In the case of Catalonia and in Barcelona, the first time it was celebrated was in 1320, for register we have. And at first, of course, it was done by the Catalan church, it was a very religious thing, but then it sort of, because of all these guilds and what I was just talking about, the wealth of all these, it becomes a very urban thing. And people start to come out into the streets, and a lot of donations are given from the government, but also the people. And it becomes a huge procession, kind of like the Broadway show of the year, where everyone would step out and be a part of this huge procession. And here we have these giant figures called the Els Gigants, which are either patron saints of a church, they are historical figures, or anyone really important to a specific field. And so kind of the first real register we have of this is in 1424. It's called the Llibre de Solemnitats, which is Book of Solemnities. And of course, this is written in Gothic Catalan, which I unfortunately cannot read. I work with transcriptions. But this is just to show you a visual that in this book, in this archive, we have exactly everything that would have happened in this procession, the exact order, which church went after who, which guild went after who, which representations would have been done. So for example, here we have the creation of the world, the fall of Lucifer. These are all these mystery plays that would have actually happened. Mystery plays, by the way, meaning any kind of visible scene, reaction, or something wondrous that happened. And so just to get a bit more visual, unfortunately there's no pictures from the time, but we have procession as it looked like, which would be all these guilds holding up their banners, representing themselves, trumpets. You have the giant figures, for example, this huge eagle here represents St. John, which would have been a part of the St. John Church. And so the procession would walk around the major parts of the city, and then it would keep expanding as the city expanded. And as the mystery plays, as far as that goes, we have another huge archive here. It's the manuscript of Viables, which was actually in Mallorca, but then it's now in archives in Barcelona. This is 49 different plays that would have been done during the Corpus Christi procession. They would have also been done during the feast days of the saints. And what's really interesting and why I'm bringing this one up as I was studying it is because this isn't just something that was put away in the archive. It's actually something that's still living memory, something that's still interacted with. There's actually one of the mystery plays, which is the Mystery of St. Francis, and that was actually redone in 2019. A medievalist, Catalan medievalist, Lenke Kovacs does a transcription of these plays into modern Catalan, and the Franciscan Church gets interested by it. They decide, let's go and try to re-perform this, reenact this. And so they go to this Grand Seraphics Theater director, Roger Pau. They ask him to do this, and he's like, yes, I will do it. And so they go on a tour to the Mallorcan convent where it was done, and they perform outdoors and indoors. And what's really interesting when I was interviewing this director when he did it, when I was comparing it to my own experience as well, was that being in this space, the exact space where it would have been 500 years ago, you feel an incredible connection to the world around you, to the scheme of things, the grand scheme of things, and also with the role itself. You really identify with the role. And he said that at one point, but also the verses of this whole play and how it was adapted to the modern audience, was that you really don't feel like you're in the play at all. You feel like you're just praying something. It was really interesting. And so this is just today, just to show you that it still continues to happen in 2025. You know, it starts from the cathedral. The procession is basically almost the same, but it crosses more touristy areas to kind of show off the Barcelona Catalan culture. And so all of this continues to happen. You have the dances, you have the giants, and these are some of my pictures as I was walking through the processional route myself. Another chapter that I talk about here is the monasteries chapter. Why monasteries? Monasteries are kind of seen as something that a predecessor of liturgical drama, where liturgical drama kind of originates from. And so in this case, we have the monastery of Sant Cugat, which is around 15 minutes away from Barcelona by train. What's really interesting about this case in particular is that they actually were part of the Corpus Christi in 1424 in Barcelona. And I was like, that's not possible, there's no way. But yes, they actually made a whole pilgrimage from 5 to 6 hours crossing mountains to get to Barcelona on time for this procession, showing just how big it was. And then once they sort of were part of this procession for so long, in 1575, they then moved back to Sant Cugat, where they do it themselves, kind of creating a more small town identity through this. And so they have their giant figures too. They actually had them on display, which is wonderful at the cloister. and the church as well. And so all of these people are part of their procession in their own town now, walking through their own streets, with their own patron saints, with their own big giant figures, their own. And so one more example, unfortunately, since I can't be there for the Corpus Christi processions in June, that's happening now, I did go to a lot of medieval dramas that happened back then also in the Christmas time. And so this one's a very interesting one because it talks about the Cante de la Sibila, the chant of the Sibyl. The Sibyl is actually a Greco-Roman figure. It's a very pagan almost thing. And she has supposedly a prophetic vision of the final judgment of Christ. And so this is something that is done since the 10th century in Catalonia. It occasionally stopped. There's some promotion with that. But since the 15th century, it is done in Catalan and continues to be done. It's something seen as, it's actually part of UNESCO now. It's seen as something that's cultural patrimony to Catalonia. And what's really amazing is that in this, there's a huge crowd of people. You enter a dark cathedral. This is actually the cathedral when it would have still been done back in the 13th century. And it's just completely dark. And you see a choir that starts singing and singing. And then in comes the Sibyl in all of light. And she kind of tells you this whole prophecy with her Gregorian chants. And in that, you not only feel literally very small because the cathedral is massive, but you also feel small, especially now having studied the text of what the Sibyl says. You feel small in the grand scheme of things, but yet you know that you're all together as a crowd. And so in conclusion, the medieval has never really left Catalonia. It's very much part of what Catalonia is today, and it's really the reason this language continues to survive. Even though it's part of Spain, the Catalan identity is still very prominent through things like this, through these mystery plays, Corpus Christi processions. Even though they are religious, they are kind of something that is very much part of the people and their traditional custom. And that's really all I have to say. Thank you very much. And thanks for having me. And questions, of course. Yes.
Hi, I'm Lena Mazzouli. I'm your classmate. I saw a quote that said that in 1970, the Corpus Christi procession kind of died in Barcelona, and it gained traction again in 1992, I think, because of the demand. So yeah. I'm wondering, like, was there any like political or reason in Barcelona for that pause? For, like,
yeah, there's many. I mean, essentially, Franco was like part of the whole Francoist regime ended in 1974, and the reason it was paused, though, the procession was never paused, but the mystery plays were, because it was seen as something very secular for some time. People started including their own language. They were ad-libbing. They were saying kind of things, and so the church didn't really like that. So that's why. And the processions did kind of die off a little bit, but the reason it was brought back in 1992 was because the Olympics were held in Barcelona, and the Catalan people decided we need to show them what we've got, you know. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay. I don't know if you do. I'm really bad.
It's on that. There's one that said anchor. There's one that said anchor. Oh yeah, in the middle. Yeah, thanks. Alright, thank you.
Are you gonna stay here?
Yeah, I mean, just take it. Good? Okay. Hello? Hello?
Oh, so you don't need it if you're here.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Joseph Bricolari. My mentor for this research is Dr. Yoshi Lord in our accounting department. And today I'm going to be talking about my research involving corporate tax avoidance, but through the lens of how leaders compare to their large competitors. And so my research questions here are, do the publicly traded industry leaders, in this case Apple, Nike, and Starbucks, as the leaders of those industries, how do their effective tax rates compare to their large competitors? And what are the explanations for years where a leader's effective tax rate is different from the industry's? Finally, what are the tax strategies that are being used to lower tax liabilities? And I look at all these questions through a lens of policy because it's policy, tax policy, or the lack of, that creates an effective tax rate. And so more into this. Ooh, this looks kind of... Anyway, so more into this is that it's actually the... is there a way to... No, it just came out bad. Okay. More into this is that we analyze corporate tax avoidance through this variable called an effective tax rate, which is different than the statutory rate. The statutory rate is what's written in the law, and the effective tax rate that a company pays is usually a lot lower than this. Because multinational firms are very large, they have the largest revenues and expenses relative to other companies, like smaller competitors. They are able to manipulate the largest dollar amounts and have the largest tax implications there. And they do this through various strategies, and there's like a legal side to it, where we take deductions and credits, like individuals also take these. But then there's gray zones, which is kind of these uncertain tax positions that companies take that kind of bring into the question of economic substance. Is a company doing this for business-related reasons, or are they just doing it for a tax incentive? And so the significance of this is more like the idea that public multinational C corporations are very small in number, but have the greatest impacts when it comes to taxes. See, they account for 2/3 of taxes paid, despite being less than 1% of all companies in the United States. And when companies become so large, it can be argued that it's really hard for nations to enforce their own policy. One, because the company can easily leave a jurisdiction and go to another country where rules are more looser. And also, when you're dealing with billions of dollars, it's hard for regulators to control all of that flow of capital and audit that effectively. And so a lot of these multinational companies do a good amount of business in the United States. So I'm looking at how the U.S. tax policy has changed since the 1980s, which is where my research, where my database begins. And so the overall general theme is that there's been increasing tax deductions and credits over time through this tax legislation, as well as a lowering in our business tax rate. So before 2017, we're under a worldwide tax system and a very high corporate tax rate, meaning that when a company makes money in a foreign country, they would be taxed on that money that they made abroad when they brought it back to the United States. So essentially, they would keep money outside the United States for as long as possible to avoid U.S. tax liability. And so after 2017, we changed this to a hybrid territorial system where we moved to a system where even if money is taxed in a foreign nation, it would not be taxed again when it's brought back to the United States. And we have certain provisions to stop companies from doing too much business abroad. And now we're under a much lower tax rate, under a 21% rate, that is. And so this chart shows it nicer, where starting from the 1980s, we're under a very high corporate tax rate, 46%. And over time, we see this general decrease in tax rates, and in part because foreign nations have had lower tax rates compared to ours, and so we've been pressured to lower our own in response. Moving on, we have the tax schemes, specific schemes of all three industries, and here we have Nike in 2006. This involves a case with the Netherlands and Nike in their collaboration to lower their tax liability. Essentially, two Nike subsidiaries, their European operations, Netherlands company, and their Converse company, are recording sales from various different countries in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And they record all of those sales as if they occurred in the Netherlands itself, and they move or expense a lot of those payments, those profits from all the countries, to non-taxable entities. And so the Dutch are only receiving tax on a very limited operating margin. So I really want to show this picture here that shows it very nice, where you see that a lot of sales are being collected all over Europe as if they occurred in the Netherlands, where they go to these two Nike subsidiaries. So Nike owns Converse, if you didn't know, and a lot of that money doesn't stay in the Netherlands. It actually gets shifted in royalty payments. And this is the idea that a company has a valuable intellectual property, and so it has to pay Nike parent companies for like licensing for saying something like Nike swoosh. And it moves to non-taxable or non-resident entities that are not taxed in the Netherlands, and so the Dutch only receive a very limited margin. However, this 1 or very low % rate is still enough for the Dutch to have an incentive, as well as incorporation fees and licensing fees that they also collect there. And so looking through financial filing, so this is 2013, Nike creates a 10K every year. They create a 10K filing where they publicly disclose what subsidiaries they own. And so this one proves the existence of certain subsidiaries and where they're incorporated. And you see that despite there being lots of different countries where they are incorporated, there's a lot of incorporations in the Netherlands and Bermuda because of their looser rules. And so similarly, these other two industry leaders, being Apple and Starbucks, they also are involved in similar schemes where the general idea is profit shifting and benefiting from foreign tax codes. And so this is just a simple picture of Tim Cook defending himself when the Senate, the U.S. Senate, had a hearing involving his role in an Apple scheme involving the help of Ireland. Moving on, we have the effective tax rate. So the way we analyze corporate tax avoidance is through these effective tax rates, and there's two types actually. So there's the GAAP effective tax rate, which is known as the generally accepted accounting principles, and this is the theory of accounting. And you can also think of this more generally as paper taxes. It doesn't actually represent the physical movement of money and or the tax rules. The tax rules and the physical flow of money is the cash effective tax rate. And I want to show this methodology page where this is an example of a screenshot of data I'm working with and the certain tools I use to get to this point. So, oh man, a lot of it's missing. But the point is here is that I pulled competitors for each of the three industry leaders using various sources. So one of the sources we have is IBIS World, which creates these industry reports. Experts create pages, create documents that signify a company's industry competitors, the market conditions, and more. Then we have the Bloomberg Terminal, which is, this is a picture we have, a screenshot of the Bloomberg Terminal. You can actually access it down the hall through our library. And this is the key performance indicator page where Bloomberg puts together, this is Nike competitors, and it shows Nike's metrics relative to its competition. If you're looking at who to invest in, you want to see, okay, well, if should I invest in Nike? How are they comparing relative to their competition? Then we pulled variables using CompuStat, which is a tool on the Wharton Research database. And from there, we clean the data. Following what other research does, we remove years of negative pre-tax expense, negative pre-tax income, negative pre-tax expense, and negative cash taxes paid as that skews the data. And then we can visualize it from there. And so just before I go into the following, this is just going to be descriptive statistics, meaning that it's mean and standard deviation. But in more deeper analysis, when you look at a U-test, for example, there's actually no statistical difference between a leader's effective tax rate and that of the competition. So that in itself is a finding. Moving on, so we have Apple. And the idea here is that Apple's paper tax expense is actually very high relative to its competition. If you see here, they have the 9th highest paper tax expense, but they actually do avoid cash taxes better. So they have a high paper tax expense and a moderate cash tax expense, and this is essentially due to deferment, meaning that they're able to defer a lot of their paper taxes and only pay a lower cash tax rate relative to its competition. Nike, on the other hand, is actually a great paper tax avoider and is a great cash tax avoider. You see here they rank, you can't really see, but they rank 3rd and 2nd in terms of those metrics and relative to their competition. And there's not much deferment because both of those tax rates are low, so they don't need to push off much of their paper tax expense. And finally, we have Starbucks, where they're only a moderate relative tax avoider, meaning they're more in the middle of their own ranking, and they're actually a poor relative avoider, meaning that their cash tax expense is higher relative to its competition. This isn't to say that they're bad at avoiding tax, it's just relative to their competition, they don't perform as well. And there's low deferment, meaning that they have a higher paper tax and also a high cash tax, so they're not able to defer a lot of that tax expense. And so here we see in a more specific view, there's years where a leader, in this case Apple in the red, is either their effective tax rate can either be a lot higher or a lot lower than that of their competition. And so by looking deeper into their company's 10Ks, which again are these financial filings, we can see why this is. So I want to walk you through this Nike 2017 disclosure, where we see the reconciliation of the effective tax rate. And you can see that the single driver for these 3 years is the benefit from foreign earnings. And so what companies publicly disclose and reference is their indefinite reinvestment of foreign earnings. They say that as long as we're keeping money outside the United States, we're receiving such a low tax rate. And you can see here in 2017, the effective tax rate drops 21% because of the benefit for foreign earnings, 18% in 2016, and 15% in 2015. And you can see that the effective tax rate here is, for 2017, 13%, when the federal rate's 35%. You see that spread is all due to their effective tax planning and tax avoidance strategies. There's also some other themes that companies publicly disclose as their benefits for tax breaks. And one of these is like a tax holiday, where the U.S. government is in desperately need of money, and so they offer incentives for companies to bring money back to the United States to be taxed there, but at a very low corporate tax rate. And so finally, the conclusion is that all three leaders have been exposed in tax schemes, and they do this through their own subsidiaries and profit shifting. And the facilitation of this is through foreign earnings. And so the policymakers of foreign countries are incentivizing the largest corporations to move money there for a tax break. And looking through the data more precisely, all companies are doing this, but there's no meaningful data to support a leader has any inherent avoidance advantages relative to its competition. And so what this means is that when we look at tax policy, I'm not sure that there's really a need for policymakers to single out those industry leaders, but it seems like the whole industry as a whole, has methods to avoid taxes in similar ways. And so that is just about it.
So there is a moral punchline. For me, I'm Professor Natalie. There is a moral punchline, right? I mean, it's numbers, but there is a moral here. That companies are using these tools and foreign leaders are using these tools to avoid paying taxes in the United States in a way that disadvantages American taxpayers, right? I mean, it would be useful, I think, to make sure that your audience is always clear on where you're going. If I'm understanding this is correct, am I?
Yeah. So definitely, yeah. There's so the idea is that the United States is kind of a little more stricter when it comes to tax policy, and so when you have this spread of like a strict country's tax rules and a country like Bermuda, and these jurisdictions where there's very low, the Cayman Islands, for example, is big. There's a small island named Jersey where there's almost no or very low corporate tax rate, and the rules are kind of looked over. And so when you have this spread, it kind of is sensible for a company to go ahead and take a benefit from a foreign company, for a foreign country, such as those that I mentioned. And so the idea here is that they all take advantage of this, but kind of who does it the best? So if you're looking at an industry leader, well, they're the largest. Is there anything to say about maybe there's an advantage of being the largest? Maybe they're able to pull in, they're effectively able to manipulate foreign countries to get the lowest tax rate, or maybe their tax planning strategies are the best because they have the most money. And so what this shows is that, one, that they all take advantage of the foreign tax codes, right? And two, is that they're actually, at least to my data in this analysis, their foreign tax rates, their overall tax rates aren't greatly different from their competition. It seems like they're all able to be below statutory rates, meaning that they're able to pay lower than what the law says, but they're not able, there's no data to show that the leader is a lot lower than their competition in any type of statistical metric.
Thank you very much.
No, you're okay.
Okay. Hi everyone. Good morning. I guess I can still say good morning. And my name is Sabrina Zami, and I'll be speaking about the representation of disability in children's and middle grade literature. It's not. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Yeah. So my research questions are: how are disabled characters represented, and for whom are they represented? So there's been a lot of focus on diversity in literature in recent years. Most consider diversity's primary goal is to act as a mirror for readers who are part of that diverse and marginalized group that is being represented, a way for readers to see themselves in literature. In contrast to this mirror approach, ability diversity often focuses on being a window into another way of life. By a window, I mean that this is for readers who are not familiar or part of this specific way of life or marginalized group having a peek or a little glimpse into what it's like. And of course, these two things are not mutually exclusive. A book can be both a mirror and a window, but there are certain books that do have a specific focus or emphasis. And as we'll see, many books about disability have a specific emphasis on the non-disabled reader. By saying that ability diversity's primary function is to serve the non-disabled reader, as scholars and advocates, we all suggest that ability diversity's goal is to teach people not to be ableist. It's to foster understanding and compassion, rather than be something that children with disabilities can look at and see themselves in. My research has analyzed literary texts from three categories. So I have pre-contemporary novels, I have contemporary middle grade novels, and I have contemporary preschool children's books. Picture books. Sorry. So to start with the traditional novels, for these there is not really a question of audience because these are in a time where diversity or representation or gearing literature towards a specific marginalized group just didn't exist. So these are definitely geared towards the non-disabled reader because that is who was reading at the time. From these novels, we see two attitudes towards disability in this time period. The first is the pitiable child who is innocent but afflicted. This is Clara from Heidi and Colin from The Secret Garden. Both are helpless children pitied by those around them. Yes, they are cared for, but they are thought of as incapable. They're spoiled, have misplaced sympathy, while Colin in particular is rather spoiled and, for lack of a better word, bratty when you first meet him. They're both truly good children with good hearts. And both of these characters are cured by the end of the book, using the magic cure trope, which suggests that children or people with disabilities are somehow inherently lesser or less human than people who do not have disabilities. The second attitude in this time period in these books is the twisted mind in the twisted body idea, which is where a disabled adult, here Long John Silver and Captain Hook, are the villain of a story. These two are pirates who refuse to be helpless and refuse to be pitied, and therefore they're met with contempt instead of the pity they would have normally gotten. Both of these attitudes show a complete lack of respect for people with disabilities, with the first two characters being cared for and loved but not respected, and the other two characters disrespected out of pure animosity. Moving into the contemporary novels, all of these books have a certain lesson to impart on the reader. Lessons about bullying, respect, or how to treat others tend to be geared more towards the non-disabled reader, while lessons of internalized ableism, self-advocacy, these are more for the disabled reader. All these books are first-person narration, both different degrees of interiority, which is to say, closeness of the narration. And what has been trend in these books is the books that are having more interiority on a disabled narrator have more of a intention towards the disabled reader. This is especially clear in the Percy Jackson franchise. This is a 20-plus book franchise, the first 5 of which are first person, and the rest are third person. The first 5 books are extremely close narration, very, very much tons of interiority, and are very, very much geared towards children who have disabilities, at least in the representation of disability. There are other elements of this book that are enjoyed by everyone. The later books really don't deal much with disability, don't have as much representation, not only geared towards children with disabilities, but don't include much representation of disability at all. And that is very telling because those books are still close, but close to third person instead of close first person narration. So I've talked a lot about like mirrors and windows, and I want to explain what exactly I mean by this by giving you an example from one of my novels. Let's look at Fish and Tree by Linda Mullally Hunt, which is the only novel analyzed in my research that balances these two models. On the one hand, the protagonist Allie struggles with internalized ableism, which acts as a mirror for the reader. For the reader who struggles with internalized ableism, they may find solace, comfort, representation, or even acceptance in reading Allie's story. Another part of this novel is Allie's social isolation and the way she is bullied by her classmates, who eventually learn how to treat people who, well, she has dyslexia, but in general people with disabilities with respect and kindness, which serves as a window into how isolating or hurtful ableism can be, so that children who do not have disabilities do not become like Allie's classmates. Now let's look at picture books. These are for a much younger age group than the novels, but they're still meant for the upper ages of the picture book demographic. So about ages 5 to 6, 5 to 7. Some of these follow the messaging of the novels. Certainly, We're All Wonders and Wish and Tree are the companions to middle grade novels, so they target much of the same themes and messages. But there are actually more books here targeting children with disabilities than in the contemporary novel section. So, also, another thing to note is that there are significantly more books here written by people with disabilities and written in an autobiographical format. As opposed to, in the novel section, there's only one book written about the author's own disability, which is C.C. Bell's LDFO. Patricia Palacios' Thank You, Mr. Falco stands out as a book that includes a bully character, but is not geared towards children without disabilities. The messaging of this book is not don't bully people with disabilities or don't be ableist, but is much more focused on the main character of Trisha, who is Patricia Palacios' younger self, saying you can't control what other people do, but you can control how you react and how you feel about it. Because in the book, Trisha feels very, Trisha lets the bullying affect her a lot and starts to believe the things that the bullies say about how she's not intelligent, how she, because she struggles to read, that somehow means something about her self-worth. And what Palacios is saying is, you can control how the bullying affects you. Some of these books address children's way of asking rather impertinent questions, and I'm sure we all know what I mean by that. So Jane Catchpole's book, What Happened to You, is one of these books. That's this book right here. In this book, Joe, our main character, is playing on the playground, and all his peers are pestering him with questions about why he only has one leg. He doesn't want to answer, he just wants to play. And while these questions are not malicious at all, they're completely uncalled for. The book is about people with disabilities' right to privacy and right to not want to answer these questions. And therefore the messaging is twofold. On one hand, the messaging is to children with disabilities, do not you do not have to answer these questions, but also to the children without disabilities, do not ask these questions. Another book that I've analyzed, which seems almost contradictory, is Kate Mazika's Maybe Just Ask Me, where the children do not ask her what happened, do not ask Macy what happened to her. Instead, they talk about her behind her back. And at the end of the book, she confronts them and say, if you want to know what happened, just ask me. Don't talk about me behind my back and make up all these crazy scenarios. While these books seem contradictory, they actually have a lot in common. Both essentially tell children to be respectful of their peers. For Catchpole, being respectful means respecting their space and respecting their privacy. But for Maisie, being respectful means Kate Mazika, who is Maisie in the book. This is an autobiographical book. For me, Mazika, this means to respect a person's ability to tell their own story and not to take that from them. And in both books, the protagonists are ignored by the children. In What Happened to You, the other children only want to know what happened to Joe. They don't care to play with him, at least not until the end, where they learn that Joe has a right to his privacy. But for most of the book, they don't care to actually play with him or get to know him as a person. They just want to know what happened. And in Maybe Just Ask Me, Maisie is the subject of every conversation that she herself was not part of. And basically, these two books seem contradictory, but I think they work together in saying that, yes, you should respect people's privacy, but also that doesn't mean that disability is this hush-hush taboo topic that you can't talk about or can't ask about. Overall, my research has identified 3 significant themes. There is a notable difference between literature featuring children with disabilities and literature regarding other marginalized groups. Unlike with other forms of diversity, the audience and the group being written about are often not the same. What is the reason for this imbalance? What does it say about our society, our perceptions of disability, that we need so many books to teach children how to treat people with disabilities with respect and humanity, to the point where we're neglecting writing books to teach children with disabilities about themselves and to represent themselves? Why is there so much emphasis on the non-disabled child when we're talking about disabled children? Thank you so much, and let me know if you have any questions.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for your presentation. I don't know. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
I raised children, 3 of whom have dyslexia, and I'm just so sorry that some of those books you just showed were not available when they were kids. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have one final presentation.
Yeah. What did I? Sorry. Thesis?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you so much. Okay. Hi, everyone. Oh, is it showing? More? Right here?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, hi everyone. My thesis is an analysis of the natural cycle of commodities under capitalism within the lens of graffiti art in New York City, done with the assistance of Dr. Kelly Britt. So,
The inspiration of my thesis is the growing attraction of grit within space, particularly in places such as the Lower East Side, which I happen to be repping for some reason, and Bushwick. This is especially relevant, considering that Orchard Street in Manhattan was just named the coolest street in the United States for 2025, with many citing its grunge as being some of its key attractors. The images on the left depict the use of street art, such as murals, as well as traditional graffiti, also known as graph, in curating such grunge. Consequently, businesses have now leaned in on the use of these styles to sell an image of urban life that is truly far from its roots. So this leads me to the main question of my research. How has graffiti become the primary tool in this gritty style of marketing, and what are the implications of its corporate adoption for other areas of culture? I intend on answering this question by viewing the history of graffiti in New York City, which is simultaneously its place of origin, transformation, and sanitization, within the lens of capitalistic frameworks to come to understand how our perception of culture can also be greatly influenced by commodification. Graffiti's most rudimentary form is known as wall writing, which came about in the South Bronx in the 1960s to 1970s. During this time, the Bronx was experiencing intense neglect following the construction of the Cross Bronx Expressway under Robert Moses, which displaced thousands of residents and caused rampant joblessness, as seen in the images. As a result, building owners, desperate for money, burned their buildings to the ground. The situation was dire as thousands of fires took place in a 2-year time period. The state of which the South Bronx was at was considered to be irreparable to policymakers who would much rather completely neglect the region in hopes that the people left themselves. So graffiti emerged in a time of neglect, but it offered a creative and social outlet for youth when their schools were rapidly cutting down on programs due to a lack of care from those in charge. Tacky 183, as seen in the image above, was the most notorious writer, whose claim to fame was based within his simple ability to be everywhere. As a result, newspapers took notice, and the movement blossomed as more and more people joined in looking for similar amounts of fame. The consequence of the growth of the movement was the development of style, as writers wanted to distinguish themselves from each other, and artistic ability became a form of social currency over frequency. Bubble letters, colors, and caricatures were now the norm, if not the expectation, in graffiti bombing, which is also another word for writing. This marked a time when the practice was truly considered art form. It's important to note whenever I talk about graffiti, I'm mostly talking about its stylized form, which was most prevalent on New York City subways, since that's where just most writers chose to bomb during the time. And this is just some more examples of the graffiti that I'm choosing to discuss, taken by the book Subway Art by Martha Cooper. Because of its origins and abandonment, graffiti essentially symbolized it to policymakers, and to this, the broken windows theory was applied for its eradication, which stated that if one broken window in a neighborhood would invite more and worse crime as time passed, so it's incredibly important to target the root of the crime in prevention measures. In this case, graffiti was the broken window, and though this could definitely have truth to it, it's important to emphasize that the fight against graffiti was also deeply racially motivated. Writers were specifically profiled to be Black or Puerto Rican, but the practice itself was incredibly desegregated at the time. Jeff Chang, author of the book Can't Stop Won't Stop, noted that by the mid-70s, the second generation of writers was more integrated in the army. And Cap One, over here in Style Wars, discussed how easy it was for him to get away with bombing, and the theft of art supplies since he was Caucasian. The primary fight against graffiti took place under Mayor Edward Koch, whose voters were mostly white, and it can then be said that his focus on graffiti art acted as a smokescreen for strategic stereotyping and discrimination in order to garner more support from his target demographics, who are already disillusioned due to the ongoing fiscal crisis and searching for causes of their societal ills. Anti-graffiti measures, from campaigns to cleanups and ultimately criminalization, may have cleaned up the trains, but definitely fueled the justification of hostility towards poor people of color. While graffiti was being erased due to visual and symbolic concerns, the high art world was scrambling to capitalize on its aesthetic. As graffiti developed style, it also became something way more tolerable. It was here where groups like the UGA in the 1970s and street artists like Jean-Michel Basquiat brought the street vibe to audiences that were far from the average streetgoer who once witnessed these types of art daily and for free. With the UGA, former members state that the group contributed to the loss of graffiti's purity because they were among the first to sell the artwork. And below here, just to specify, that's a work by Basquiat called New York New Wave. I also find it interesting to note that he fell under the profile of a common offender considering his ethnic background. But when value was thrown into the mix of him and his work, all was absolved. This is one of the first instances of the product being held separate from the creator, especially considering that Basquiat rose during a time of intensive racial conflict in the city. Though people took value from his work, there was still general lack of regard for the community of which he represented, which is something that persists today on a more convoluted scale, as I will come to discuss in later slides. The paradox of graffiti art and high art continues when you consider the nature of the practice. Though the graffiti in galleries looked and probably smelled like graffiti, and it stopped being graffiti and instead became street art. Graph was always free in public, but street art was controlled and sold. Aesthetics were not the only reason for the growing acceptance towards graffiti, which transformed into street art when privatized. People were drawn in by the newfound ability to literally own something so taboo and symbolic to the city. In earlier years, grit was a term that held rather negative connotations, being associated with abandonment and decay in neighborhoods. Therefore, graffiti was authentically gritty because of where it began. Over time, grit became less of something to be avoided and more of something to be embraced. This is all because of changes in media coverage. Grit was being thrown around when speaking about television shows representing in New York, punk clubs like CBGB in the Lower East Side, and raw forms of neo-expressionism, which is the art movement that Basquiat led. Visions of grit and grunge were considered cool as they were being conflated with all things young and chaotically beautiful. This new desire towards what was simply just considered dilapidation primed the graffiti movement to be taken over for its value. So, graffiti started on the streets, entered the subways, landed in the galleries, and was transformed into street art in its eradication. And today it's back in public with the Bushwick Collective, which is who did this mural here, and it's obviously inspired by graffiti. As grit and images of struggle became symbolically pleasing, it is no surprise that neighborhoods have leaned in on it to seem more attractive to visitors. The Bushwick Collective have taken over the region through the exhibition of street artists, rebranding a once largely neglected and stigmatized area into one that's cool, hip, and beautiful because of the neglect. Though the art is essentially free, there's a symbolic exchange occurring, where the product is a lifestyle that the art communicates to viewers. Whenever you read a research paper concerning graffiti, they first differentiate graffiti and street art because people often use these terms synonymously. But it goes beyond language. Street art has always acted as a safe replacement for graffiti, emulating it and utilizing its cool meanings while doing so in a way that's significantly less accessible to the real practice. The use of street art in Bushwick contributes to this sort of appropriation of counterculture, profiting from such meanings and doing so in a way that's not necessarily rebellious at all. Bushwick has now developed associations of being a punk and hip neighborhood, drawing in tourists and new residents. Nowadays, graffiti stands to be an idea, one that's safely replicated in order to provide a curated experience of the authentic New York City lifestyle. This is my chart discussing the transformation of graffiti into street art. I'm trying to be, take that wall writing inspiration, but though graffiti in its most authentic form existed as a form of rebellion that cultivated community amongst abandoned youth groups in New York City, its connotations still somehow exist with street art, though the two have completely different modes of creation. So this leads me to the next question. Why is it that street art, a genre born from the suppression of graffiti, continues to extract value from the movement, and how is it harmful? I always struggle with this word. The phenomenon that allows street art to flawlessly profit off the rich history and symbolism without dealing with the same pushback of the movement is best outlined by Karl Marx with his idea of commodity fetishism, which occurs when the supply chain or the social relationships that go into a product's creation become obscured. The gap in consumers' awareness to how a product was created leaves the consumer to fetishize and mystify it. The visions of rebellion and traditional grit fill in spaces left by legal and safe modes of conception unseen by the viewer. The synonymous use of graffiti and street art erases the diverse and tight-knit community that graffiti cultivated when the rest of the city turned their backs on neighborhoods they deemed ruined beyond repair. Commodity fetishism makes it easier for consumers to be confused and sold to, which is what is landing Bushwick to be one of the more costly neighborhoods in New York City, as prices began to jump around 2015 and 2016, just a couple of years after the collective's establishment in 2012. Though the collective is not solely to be blamed here, there is certainly a correlation between street art, the rebranding of Bushwick into a hip area, and rising costs. My research was inspired by the growing desire for authenticity and branding, and in the context of graffiti art, it can easily be said that this vibe economy is exploitative of true cultural innovators. Gentrification is a byproduct to the curation of lifestyles, which extracts only the best parts of something, leaving behind years of opposition to cultural significance that came into the product's conception. It goes without saying that this greatly harms the communities who live these lives most authentically by privatizing their culture and weaponizing it against them by making neighborhoods unlivable due to high costs. The complication of the supply chain under capitalism, which is continuing on a grander scale due to artificial intelligence and mass production, is what makes consumers most susceptible to storytelling, and what is therefore makes storytelling one of the more effective ways to market. I hope that my research not only shines light on the rich history that genuine New York City graffiti has, but motivates greater consumer awareness to how all spaces, even the most gritty, are susceptible to commodification. So it's important to be conscious on how our consumption has the possibility of affecting communities when not all parts of something is seen or even considered. But yeah. Thank you so
Question? So thank you for this. It's really stimulating, and I was thinking about the relationship of commodification and nostalgia and gentrification. Your choice of T-shirt can't possibly.
I know. I actually did not think this one through. Orchard Street.
I'm curious. I mean, it's a great shop. Chuck Bones has carved out quite a niche for himself in there, if you can afford to shop there. And I mean, the merchandise there is stunning, and I don't know any other place quite like it. And then, of course, it happens to be on Orchard.
Exactly.
Okay, so I know this is not about graffiti, but if commodification, nostalgia, and gentrification, it seems so relevant to that particular place. And look, I don't want to pick on it. I mean, I like what it represents, but I also have some conflicted feelings about it in the context of what you're talking about, especially your very final comments. I'm not asking you to defend a guy or defend that shop or the other kinds of places like it on Orchard. But I'm curious though about your responses wearing the shirt.
Thoughts on Orchard? Honestly, I just like the shirt. I don't know the history of the shop specifically. I think I do know a lot of the businesses there are long-standing, so it's not like they just established themselves and they're like trying to profit off of these suckers who are coming to New York City. No, but I'm saying that I think there is an image that's being upheld, and a lot of people who don't have that nostalgic component, like a lot of the people who are coming in, it's not like they have memories attached to New York City and they're trying to relive it. These are people who are there's just so many things conflating certain ideas with one another, and they come to New York to live an experience that never truly existed, and as a result, it's like kind of, it's just creating an experience rather than like an authentic way of living. So that's kind of where I was going about it, specifically with the Busher Collective. A lot of their murals are graffiti inspired, but people think it's just so cool, and I'm like going into the cool. I'm trying to understand what's cool, what's so cool about it. I think it has a lot to do with the struggle that brought it about. But yeah.
I have a question. I have a comment. You gotta go see the Martha Cooper show at the Bronx Documentary Center, which closes in a couple of days. So she's badass. Go see that.
No, she definitely is. But yeah.
If capitalism defines our country, I think one of the secondary results of that is litigation over getting money. I don't know if you're familiar with 5 Points in the Bronx.
I did hear of it, yeah.
Yeah, so I was curious about a comment because that was actually a victory for the rebel, graffiti artists. Are you familiar with it?
I actually did this also for Tao. So unfortunately, I did overlook that part of my research. I think someone else honestly ended up researching as well. But yeah.
Yeah, I think there was a big settlement in favor of the artists when the building that contains all the amazing graffiti pulled down in the development. Also on a footnote, My son-in-law grew up in Syracuse, the suburbs, and his community of teenagers was painting all over freight cars, railroad jobs, so I appreciate that. I mean, I'm one of those nostalgic people who grew up in New York and lived in trains of the 70s.
No, yeah, and you
They
know,
were amazing movies.
I was just in Coney Island, and you know, the train yard, I saw a complete train that was just bombed. And the thing is that now they go out of service, so that's why we don't see it. But it makes the city beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Maybe I wish someone had me. I haven't never been so happy. That's great job. That's so
And yet, I understood all that. So that's like